Now, on Sunday, China ended the zero-COVID policy, reopening its borders and raising hopes among major tourism markets that Chinese tourists will restart international travel. But several governments are now worried about China's spike in the COVID-19 cases. And now they are imposing curbs on travelers from China, suggesting that travel will not quickly return to pre-pandemic levels. But the peak of China's COVID-19 wave is now expected to last 2 to 3 months and will soon swell over the vast countryside where medical resources are relatively scarce. Experts say that infections are expected to surge in rural areas as hundreds of millions are now travelling to their hometowns for the Lunar New Year holidays, which officially begin from Jan 21st. Known before the pandemic as the world's largest annual migration of people, China last month had abruptly abandoned the strict antivirus regime of mass lockdowns that fueled historic protests across the country in late November, but it finally reopened its borders this past Sunday. Now, according to state media, the abrupt dismantling of restrictions has unleashed the virus onto China's 1.4 billion people, more than a third of whom live in regions where infections are already past their peak. However, the former chief epidemiologist at the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention claims that the worst of the outbreak was not yet over. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman said that China hopes that the World Health Organization will view China's COVID response scientifically and rationally, and that its related statement will reflect objectivity and impartiality towards China especially. Spokesman Wang Wenbin made the statement at a regular press briefing in Beijing following media reports that the Director General of the WHO, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, had called on countries to report more detailed and reliable data on COVID-19. The spokesman for the Foreign Ministry in China noted that since COVID-19 began, China has been sharing information and data with the international community, that too in an open and transparent manner, something that the World Health Organization has denied because they were open in dismissing China simply for their accusations that China has been underreporting the data of COVID deaths.
We have been in close communication with the WHO. In the past month alone, we had 5 technical exchanges with the organization. Only yesterday, we had another technical exchange with WHO's headquarters, regional office and China office. Building on previous communication, the two sides held in-depth exchanges on such issues as medical treatment, the COVID situation, identifying virus strains and vaccination. In addition, over the past days, the competent Chinese authorities held a series of bilateral meetings with the EU and Australia to have exchanges on COVID-related issues and strengthen response cooperation. Relevant Chinese departments and institutions continue to share the genomic sequence data on infections in China via the Global Initiative on Sharing Avian Influenza Data. All this has received recognition from the WHO and the wider international community.
Now, Ryanair's chief executive, Michael O'Leary, has said that China is expecting a very strong summer season despite risks related to the new COVID-19 variants and the rise of oil prices linked to the war in Ukraine. Asked about the impact of China's border reopening on the European aviation and tourism markets, O'Leary said, and I quote, that it was uncertain, noting a speedy recovery in Chinese travel would be good for booking and fares but could also drive up oil prices. O'Leary also said that high post-COVID demand was unlikely to weaken in the coming weeks. The CEO of the Irish low-cost airline added that he did not foresee the risk of staff shortages among airlines or European airports in the summer, but also that he was worried about European air traffic control disruptors.
The return of some Asian traffic to Europe this year will be good for bookings and for pricing this in summer 23, and we think Europe in summer 23 will be strong. But it also comes with it risks. There's the risk of spreading coronavirus. There's also the risk that oil demand for oil will rise as the Chinese economy recovers, so we're not sure. But in principle, we think there's going to be a very strong summer of bookings and pricing in Europe in summer 23, with a risk that oil prices could rise. I mean, the coming weeks, the bookings at the moment are strong for the February midterm, the ski midterm, for Easter, which is in April, and for summer 23. Bookings look strong. But we're worried, or we're concerned that there may be risks out there. This time last year we had Omicron, and then Putin invaded Ukraine at the end of February. So certainly the initial weeks, bookings over the first weeks of this year are very strong into Easter and the summer. But we think we're always concerned about the risk of a COVID variant or adverse developments in Ukraine. We don't worry too much about recession or consumer spending, because that will drive more and more people to low-cost airlines like Ryanair.
Now, ever since the pandemic hit in China's strict zero-COVID policy, which involved mass PCR testing, citywide lockdowns and centralized quarantine of all inbound arrivals, shut people, travellers and even former citizens and residents out of China for nearly 3 years, 54-year-old lab worker Chu Wenhong's last visit was actually in November of 2019, a month before the virus was first detected in the central Chinese city of Wuhan. So when China announced it was ending quarantine requirements for all inbound travellers from Jan 8th, marking the end of the government's heavy COVID-19 curbs last month, she quickly snapped up a flight ticket.
Finally, I can go back. I have been waiting for this day for a long time. Though the ticket is so expensive, but the Lunar New Year is also coming up, so I can spend the holiday with my family.